Hello, Tip, and welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel Leader, one of the co-founding members of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I'm here today with my co-host, Michael Greys, aka Big Mike.
Namaste.
And we like to welcome you, our viewing audience, Community Cop, to another program. This is where truth and real Black talk occurs. And we like to welcome you. Sit back, sit tight, as we have another program where we share some of the occurrences, some of the things that happened in the last week, or maybe a little further than that, from our perspectives. There's very few coverage of the African-American perspective, so we enjoy discussing these topics with you. All right, as customary, we open up with our historical piece, and we want to talk about a few individuals who definitely deserve mentioning. First of all, Booker T. Washington, was born on April 5th, 1856. Real quick, Michael.
Well, yeah, with respect to time, I'll just say that Booker T. Washington actually was offered the job to start a school in the middle of nowhere in Tuskegee, Alabama, and literally had nothing but space. And with his hands and the hands of a few individuals, was able to build Tuskegee Institute from scratch. It still survives today. One of the great educators, one of the great men of vision, made some speeches that we're not proud of. However, he did what he had to do from his vantage point for the school to survive. Many of you might have known the Atlanta speech that he did, where he basically buck dance, but that aside, he built an institution and that we're supposed to leave things better than where we found them. And he certainly did that. And he was the one who said, basically to cash your buckets down where you are. And if you are a bricklayer or if you make biscuits, be the best. And was able to put people through college that even if they couldn't afford it, they just had to work their off hours from school and make up for it. And he just built people that came there with no clothes. They made clothes. They made everything that they wore. They built the buildings that they actually attended school in. It's a phenomenal story, how Tuskegee Institute was built. And certainly that would not have happened without Booker T. Washington.
All right, April 17th, 1872 was the birthday of William Monroe Trotter.
Oh, one of the all-time greats, a real race man, one of the blackest men you wanted to see. He was the one who was invited to the White House of Woodrow Wilson. And, he was one of the preeminent segregationists of his day. And he went to the White House and actually challenged him on the segregation policies of Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson was firing all the federal employees that were Black ad nauseum, and the few that he left behind, they were separated from their white counterparts. And so, William Monroe Trotter challenged him on that. A great doctor, I should be calling him doctor because that's what he really is. He's a PhD, Harvard grad, and was Phi Beta Kappa at Harvard. He went to school the same time, actually, with W.B. Du Bois, and exceeded him in terms of Harvard University. And they both tried to get, truth be told, side note, the same sister, and William Monroe Trotter bested him also at that and married the girl that that W.E.B. had his eyes on. Great man in his own right and did so much for our people. He's never really talked about very much, but stood strong. And after that conversation with President Wilson, was subsequently thrown out of the White House by security for daring to challenge the president on his racist policy. But he was one of the people that started that was there at the initial meeting for the NAACP, but he left the NAACP because he said he will not be a part of any party that is controlled by white people. So him and Ida B. Wells left the organization that Booker T, WEB and so many others started, coming out of the Niagara movement. So a great man in his own right, and we need to really study some of the fantastic things that William Monroe Trotter stood for.
All right, two more individuals had a birthday. Great jazz singer Billie Holiday had a birthday on 4/7/1915, and of course, the great Paul Robeson had a birthday on 4/9/1898. Paul Robeson, of course, was a concert artist, an actor, a political activist, and both of them, Billie Holiday and Paul Robeson, received a lot of flack. Those of you who watched last week's program, we talk about the Federal Bureau of Investigation and their activity as it relates to members of the African-American community, including Black organizations, Black leaders, and in this case, Black artists. Both of these individuals were harassed because of some positions that they took. Billie Holiday, some of you may remember, wrote a great song, Strange Fruit. And some of the words in the song says, the southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the root. And she went further to describe one of the hottest topics of her day, which were lynchings of African Americans. And she wrote a song, she participated in writing the song. There's another individual who claimed, who was stated to wrote the song. She said that she assisted him. But she definitely made that song popular by singing it. And because she sung it, she received a lot of flack. She was reached out to, and she was basically told not to sing it. But she had a close connection to that particular song when she relates to what happened to her father, and the manner by which he died when he attempted to get medical treatment, and because of segregation, couldn't. And then, of course, Paul Robeson, because of his political affiliations and some of the comments that he made, the government attacked him, stopped him from making a living by seizing his passport. His case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and he lost, even though he invoked his right as an American citizen to plead the Fifth Amendment when they asked him, was he a communist? And that was a whole, crazy era at that particular time. But these are two great heroes and sheroes who stood strong for our community and should always be remembered. That's Billie Holiday and Paul Robeson. Mike, do you have any comments on these two greats?
I'll just say that certainly Billie Holiday, Lady Day, was one of the greatest we've ever produced. Blues singer, jazz singer. She was just so talented. It came from literally the gutter to prominence. She deserved that title, Lady Day, and certainly the federal government, as well as other whites, worked very hard to destabilize her, as they do with anybody they perceive to be progressive or strident, or basically just doesn't follow orders. She was told categorically several times not to sing that song, and she did, and consequently, this negative movie that they made on her recently to destroy her character, is just in a long line of movies they've been making over the last few years about various artists and personalities, leaders, and they're destroying all of their characters. And you just wonder what's next. But certainly she was a great lady in her own right. And with respect to Paul Robeson, you're talking about, I don't even know what you would call him, a Renaissance man, I imagine. Outstanding football player, basketball player, sports, great singer, phenomenal actor. He could do, and also he was a lawyer. So, Paul Robeson did it all. He was an intellect of the highest order. Just did it all. He was a four-letter man at what was it, Rutgers, I believe? No, Princeton. I think Princeton. So in any event, I'm trying to remember, but I'll just say for the record that he was great in his own right. The House on Un-American Activities tried to get him several times, that McCarthy, the McCarthy period. But in any event, he said he reserves the right not to state whatever positions he took. His record stood for itself. One of the great men, and if you want to see the seeds he left behind, it is so great to have the Ossie Davis and Ruby Dees of the world who say that they got their direction as an artist and wanted to continue to do for the people because of Paul Robeson. And you should read the book, Here I Stand by Paul Robeson. Great book.
All right, because we're going a little over on the historical piece, but I still want to mention one thing that we talked about, Michael, you and I, as it relates to Billie Holiday. That particular song, Strange Fruit, and some of the flack that she received for singing that particular song. As I say, the lynching was a hot topic of that day. And there were lynchings all over the South and even in places in the North. And she brought attention to that particular situation. And, so some people may think her singing a song about lynching just got a few people mad, but the individuals who were mad were very powerful, very influential. And although what she said was true, every word in that song was true, and the activities of lynching existed, in America at a very dark period in this country's history. They didn't criticize or oppress her or come after her because she was lying about this country. They didn't want this particular truth to be broadcasted because that song was one of her greatest hits. So she was targeted. Ultimately, she was locked up because she did have an addiction. But because of her prominence and her value to this country and her superstardom, because she was world known and received many awards, she was imprisoned. She was incarcerated, even though the district attorney stated, because of her prominence and her background, that she should be sent to a treatment for her addiction, because all she was charged with was possession. But because she rejected influential, very powerful politicians' demands that she not sing this particular song at that particular time, this is why they came after her, and she had to do a jail. I think she was sentenced to over a year in jail, which was really, symptomatic of what's happened to our people since then. When African Americans have these particular addictions, a lot of times they fill the jails where white addicts or white people who have these addictions get alternatives to incarceration. So salute to Billie Holiday, not only because of her great voice, but the position that she took and position and the decision that she made to publicize something that African Americans were experiencing, but was swept far too often under the carpet. But we want to fast forward to what's happening today. And we have a couple of updates. First, what's happening in the TV. Everyone is familiar with the prosecution of Officer Derek Chauvin, who was charged with killing and murdering George Floyd. He's, numerous charges, one of which is third degree. The last 7 days since our last program, a lot of experts have been called on by the prosecutors to testify, including the police commissioner, experts in police tactics, and all of them have criticized Officers Chauvin's actions as it relates to putting his knee on Floyd's neck for that long period of time. And it appears a lot of people are saying that this is guilt based on the prosecutor's presentation beyond reasonable doubt. But, I think the clock is out. We still have to wait and see. Of course, the police commissioner stated that this was his actions, and placing his knee on Brother Floyd's neck for that period of time was a violation of department policy. It was excessive force. It's not part of their training.
When Mr. Floyd was no longer responsive and even motionless, to continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy, it is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
Of course, we have to hear from the medical examiner. The medical examiner might claim that although Officer Chauvin's actions were not following police policy, although it might have been a little excessive, although it might not have been part of his training, but they're going to argue was a criminal. And that's what the jury is going to have to decide on. So this week coming up in the next couple of days, it's going to be very interesting to hear from the medical examiner, who previously made some comments that George Floyd had some pre-existing medical conditions. He might have had opioids in his system, which might have contributed to his death. So the defense, of course, is going to try to play games with that, to try to imply that was the cause of his death. Although Officer Chauvin's actions were inappropriate, didn't follow department policy, was it maybe excessive, but George Floyd's death was caused to pre-existing health conditions and perhaps the drugs that he had in the system. That's what the defense is going to attempt to argue. Michael, does that fly with you?
No, it really don't. It really doesn't, because this case is somewhat of an anomaly, because the polemics that are being done in this case is not really natural to police cases where somebody is killed in the process. Whether we know it or not, it is very unusual to see several sergeants, a couple of lieutenants, and a police chief actually giving testimony against a police officer. Now, we're all watching this on TV, but we have to have an understanding. The scriptures say, with all you do, get an understanding. This is not unusual. Do not believe for a second that this is just some guys getting up there calling it as they see it. Police officers do not call it as they see it. This is unusual. None of them would be saying what they're currently saying if it was not for that 9 minutes and 29 seconds of footage. The footage is so clear and so concise, and the perpetrator, Chauvin, was just so arrogant in the way he did what he did that they don't really have anywhere to go. They're all eventually going to fall on the sword for every police department in the country. Justice is not normal. It is not regular. These things are not happenstance. To see a police chief, several lieutenants, several sergeants doing what they're doing, and the representative of she's a patrolman, the one who's in charge of the medical response. She does the training for CPR with the entire police department in Minnesota. And for her testimony to not give Chauvin wiggle room. For all the other ones I mentioned, they are not giving Chauvin any wiggle room. They're all making it clear that he did not follow the policy of the Minnesota Police Department. This is unusual. You do not even have interference that we know of anyway from the Fraternal Order of Police. They normally get involved and start twisting arms. I haven't heard anything yet from the FOP. That's unusual. You know what they did in Baltimore. They made those black cops support the white cops who killed Freddie Gray. The FOP got involved and told them their law enforcement career is over if they do not support that sergeant and those other police officers and the lieutenant that played a role in killing Freddie Gray. This is not unusual, and we need to understand that. You don't get this type of action normally. It's a cover-up from top to bottom. For the police chief, who is black, by the way, to fire him the very next day, that is unusual. The videos came out right after that. It was so overwhelming and so plain that he got fired within 24 hours. That too is unusual. So you're talking about a case where the defense has a job, and their job is to find one juror with reasonable doubt. That's all they have to do. They don't need to convince 12 people, just one of reasonable doubt. So they're going to do what Noel mentioned, which is talking about pre-existing conditions. That is literally their only out. They can't go with policy. Too many experts have come in, and soon even medical experts, they had one play going for them, is that it was determined in the autopsy by the medical examiner that he died from cardiac arrest. But they know full well that that was precipitated by positional asphyxiation. So that's really what happened. He was choked out. His air supply was cut off. His blood supply was cut off within probably a couple of minutes. After that, he was pleading with his last breath for his mother, who was passed, pleading to her, telling the police officer that he couldn't breathe. Well, conventional wisdom always is, when you say any words you can't breathe, you actually can breathe. But it's very, very difficult. It's getting more difficult. As long as you can say a word, most police officers look at that as your air supply is not cut off totally, but it's waning. It was waning. And even after he was dead, he stayed there for minutes arrogantly. And this is why the defense today was saying that as a police officer, whatever action you take, you have to appear confident in front of a crowd. They tried to put the crowd on trial. They tried to put George Floyd himself on trial by talking about pre-existing conditions. They tried to act as if the crowd was a concern, that if they took their eyes off the crowd, something might jump off. The crowd was not hostile. There's one Black man that is on record, and he was a martial artist. And he made it clear. He said, "You're killing him, man. Get off his neck. Get off his neck." And when Chauvin ignored him and he was told, "Just shut up and mind his business," he said, "Oh, you're a tough guy. Oh, you real men." This was a Black man. Everything in his body was telling him to attack them. His mind, his heart was in the right place. He saw a Black man in front of him getting ready to die, and he didn't like it. He was going to move on. That was about it. The rest of the crowd was just uttering things like, "Y'all wrong," give him some CPR. They were saying the right things. But that one Black man, the ancestors touched him, and he was that close to popping off. He was that close, but he maintained discipline as a martial artist. He said it. It took everything to remain disciplined. He called him an effing punk. That's as far as he went. He called Chauvin an effing punk. And of course he's a coward. He's a low-life, no-good coward. And he shouldn't be alive. But that brother maintained discipline. He was mad and angry. And that's the anger, and all of us should be angry like that. And he expressed it. So if they think they can get some play out of saying it was a hostile crowd, they took pictures of the crowd. The crowd stayed a safe distance, but they were angry. And that's the way I see it too. They maintain the reasonable distance that a police department demands, so you won't obstruct the arrest. But that wasn't an arrest taking place. That was an execution taking place.
Or 21st century lynching. But although the police chief and the other members of the department stated that it was not following, Officer Chauvin did not follow department guidelines, although they said that it wasn't part of the training, that it was excessive. And the police chief said that at some point he should have stopped as it relates to placing his knee on his neck because there was no resistance. One thing they didn't say, which is very, very important, they didn't say that Officer Chauvin killed him. Yes, he was excessive. He didn't follow training. He didn't use department guidelines. But what the defense is going to argue, perhaps he doesn't belong on a police agency. Perhaps he should have been fired, but he didn't murder him. This wasn't murder. You know, it wasn't training. And then, of course, the defense attorney is going to say, you know, the health conditions and the drugs in the system, that's what's actually going to kill him. So, you know, the testimony of coming in the next coming days by the medical examiner is going to be very important. And although those individuals were, and I think even the defense attorney is going to concede, okay, perhaps he should have been fired. Perhaps he could have been fired. But perhaps, you know, he didn't follow the department guidelines. He didn't follow his training. You know, perhaps he should have stopped taking his knee off his neck earlier, but he didn't kill him. What he did wasn't responsible for Floyd's death. It was ultimately those other things, which we all know is a lie. But as you say to Michael, all he has to do is convince one member of the jury not to find Officer Chauvin guilty of murder for this to be either a mistrial. And I doubt if all, you know, in light of the video, of all, you know, all the members of the jury is going to say that he's not guilty, because I don't care if I didn't hear any of the facts of this case. I don't care if I didn't hear any of the testimony of the case. All one has to do, a reasonable person, the only thing a reasonable person has to do is look at the video to make a determination as it relates to Officer Chauvin's guilt or not. You know, but the way they critique every frame, every action, the way they attempt to explain it, you know, trying to act as if something that's so illogical is logical, that can give someone who's sympathetic to police officers and perhaps have some animus against members of the African-American community, or might have problem with anything that Brother Floyd did in terms of initially not, you know, submitting to an arrest. Some, you know, the defense attorney is hoping that just one member of the jury will be open to that as a possibility that, you know, even though he was excessive, didn't follow training, he wasn't responsible for Floyd's death. Floyd was responsible for his own death. And that's basically what the defense, you know, attorney is trying to hold his hat on. But we'll continue following the case. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'll just say that I think you're right, but I would just say that a point you made last week it bears repeating. Mm-hmm. And that's that all three charges, first degree, second degree, and third degree, he fits the bill. Because some people are saying he is not a candidate for first degree, but he actually is. Premeditation can be 9 days in advance, 9 months in advance. It can be 9 hours in advance. It can be 9 minutes in advance. Right. It can be 9 seconds in advance.
That's right. You
can premeditate during a given situation. This is no longer arrest. I'm judge, jury, and executioner. You can premeditate it right before you get started or right while you're talking to him and he's not cooperating fully. You can decide at that point, that's all I needed to hear, is that you don't want to get in the car. And I don't want to hear nothing about you're claustrophobic. You have given me the grounds I needed to do what I got to do now. And so I would just say that premeditation, it can be in 2 seconds. He premeditated on killing him, and the proof is that knee on the neck. No one approves of that. He is a seasoned officer that have gone through training, CPR training, resistance compliance techniques. All of that stuff were part of his arsenal. And for him to, just as you would say, Noel, dogmatically, to keep a knee on his neck for that period of time, that's all out. He can't get around that. So he's going to have to look at pre-existing conditions, because he outright killed this man and certainly while a police chief, it's not his role to say he killed him. It's his role to tell you what he saw on the video, and each of them saw on the video. But if their words are accurate with what they said, they can't tell you when he died, but they all know to a man that he was dead before that 9 minutes was up. And this is why that brother in the crowd was saying what he was saying to the police officer, because he saw a black man killed right in front of him who was no longer responding. All of the response was gone after 4 minutes. There was no talk. There was no pleading to his mother again, nothing. So he went another 5 minutes with the knee there, just showing contempt for the black community and saying, I'm the master and all y'all shut up, and got his hand in his pocket. How arrogant can you get?
Right. Okay. My final point, and then I agree with everything what you said. But like I said, one of the things that they didn't testify to was that none of his activities were criminal. Everything they testified saying it was administrative. It wasn't part of the training. It was excessive. And it was what else they say? It was he shouldn't have stayed there a long time. So what I'm saying is that if there's just one sympathetic member, because we all know what it is. We all know it was criminal. We all know that not only was it, it's something that wasn't, part of their training, but it was actually a criminal act. He actually killed our brother Floyd, by his callousness. But, I'm just remembering of what happened to our brother on Staten Island, who was killed. Eric Garner was also murdered on film before the world. Everybody see what happened. Everybody heard him say he can't breathe. Everybody seen the callousness of the police officers by pounding on his frame, not allowing, as you talk about Michael, the expansion of his diaphragm so that he can breathe. And they say, well, listen, if he can talk, he must have been able to breathe. And ultimately, the district attorney decided not to prosecute. The federal prosecutor, hold on a second, brother. The federal government decided not to prosecute. And they said everybody agreed his actions was inappropriate. It was excessive, and yes, he should be fired, but that he did not cause the death. So all this testimony sounds good, all of these comments of criticism, because he should be criticism. And with the video, you cannot do anything but criticize him. Of course, if you consider yourself to be a member of a professional law enforcement, if you look at the videos, who can say anything complimentary? Who can say that his actions were in accordance with any modern police guidelines? No one can say that. So they were critical of him. He was terminated, et cetera, et cetera. But what he's on trial for, this is not an administrative trial. He's on trial for murder 3, and then I think some manslaughter charges. So that's the thing that has to be proven. And as I stated, all you have to do is look at the video to know that's what it is. But the defense attorney is hanging his hat on. One jurist, hopefully at least one jurist, will find that they agree that he, although his actions were inappropriate, they didn't raise to the level of criminality. So I hear a lot of people happy about some of the comments and the job of the prosecutor, but automatics, I never forget what he said. For the most part, you win a trial and lose a trial by jury selection. And that's why jury selection is so important. That's why so many attorneys, when they interview a jurist, deny some, accept some, and a lot of times it's just based on race or sometimes where you live at, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm not too convinced. I know a lot of people are. I'm not too convinced that this officer's going to be found guilty, even though he should. But with time will tell. All right, last words, Mike, on this.
Yeah, I would just say that you opened up a can of worms when you mentioned Eric Garner, which provoked a response in me. Mm-hmm. The thing you have to understand is that the PBA is the strongest police union in the country. A man was killed in plain sight, 7 police officers involved in it, and none of them went to trial. One supervisor, a sergeant, a Black female sergeant. No one was tried criminally. The district attorney from Staten Island ran for Congress, refused to indict any of those police officers in plain sight, which shows you the power and the influence of NYPD and specifically the PVA. When Anthony Baez was killed by police officers in plain sight, a half dozen police officers were around Baez when he was choked out. They testified in court that yes, they was holding him down. They had the nerve to say in a court of law that it was black hands that choked Anthony Baez. Now, I've never seen any white cops with black hands. These were all white cops involved. Yet they said it was black hands around Anthony Baez's neck. Now, the judge said that there was a litany of lies in that courtroom. Well, why wasn't anybody indicted for perjury? He said it's a nest of lies going on. Something like that. I think this term was a nest of lies. But no perjury charges. So I'm just saying that to say that here in New York, when things happen in New York, it is so different. There are white people in power that have literally every so-called black leader in deep check. We were told by Reverend Sharpton that the feds are coming in on the Eric Garner case. And that cooled down a whole lot of people. When the Staten Island district attorney refused to indict those police officers, we were told that the Obama administration is coming in and that the feds are going to take over this case. We was lied to year after year after year. And then we found out that the feds were not coming in. But so I'm just saying all the black leaders were a part of it with their silence. And these are not my words. Dr. King said silence is part of, I think he said collaboration, or the way he said it. Basically, he was saying, if you saw it and you know about it and you don't do anything, you're a part of the people who did it.
And you raised a good point. We're going to move to the next subject, but we'll stay here for a second. You bring up a good point as it relates to, let's say in this particular case, as you know, Noel Leader, said on numerous programs, I'm not convinced that the officer is going to be found guilty. He should be. Right. You could talk about, when you talk about old cases, Rodney King, you can talk about Amadou Diallo. Yes. When you have these incidents, which there's no justification whatsoever, but the police are always coin it and phrase it and explain it to escape guilt. But the point I want to bring up as it relates to this particular case is, let's say in this particular instance, Officer Chauvin is not found guilty. What is the plan? What is going to be the response of our community? We should not, we should prepare for a response. We should be talking about that right now. It shouldn't come to us as a surprise if he's not found guilty. All of us know he should be guilty. He should be found guilty. He should be convicted. But let's say he's not. What is going to be our response? And that's one of the faults of the family attorney. Of course, I believe they settled the civil suit already, which we on Community Cop is always criticized that as being a bad strategy to settle before there's a conviction. But what is going to be the community's response if this officer is not found guilty? I mean, should we say, well, that's the system? What we observed in 2021, a member of our community being lynched. We talked about our sister who wrote Strange Fruit. We watched the lynching right in front of our eyes. And if the officer is not found guilty, what is going to be the response out of the community? No one's talking about that. It's as if, and I don't understand, my community has so much faith in the system of criminal injustice that this officer or these officers are going to be found guilty of our brother's death. But what if it doesn't happen? Now, if a community is so upset, so angry that they bust out in what some people consider riots, I mean, what's the game plan? What's the alternative to that? If for those who are critics of social rebellions, what is the alternative? What is the plan? What is the game plan for our young people, our young brothers, our teenagers who are going to be upset if this officer is not found guilty before it happens, just in case it does happen? Because, I mean, I don't understand why some of us don't even think that it is possible that one of the jurors is going to find the officer, going to be unwilling to find the officer guilty. What is going to be the plan? What is going to be the objective? What is the energy that we're going to pass on to our community and how to respond? I have some suggestions, but
if George Zimmerman, who outright murdered Trayvon Martin, can get off, then it's not a done deal, as you said, that Chauvin is going to be convicted. No doubt about it.
Right. And that was that officer who shot the brother in the back as he was fleeing. And one of the jurors, even though he received the instruction from the judges, and that's another thing we have to understand, that when this jury goes
you talking about the Walter Scott case?
I'm sorry, what's his name?
You talking about the Walter Scott case?
Right. Here you have an officer shot him in the back as he was fleeing, which is illegal. And he was, his guilt was not even debatable because it was on film. But there was a white jurist who says, I know the law. The judge explained it to us. I know he broke the law, but I just can't find him guilty. What if you have a member like that sitting on this jury, which is not far-fetched when we look at all of the cases, from Rodney King on up of this happening. So I'm just saying that our community, and in particular, the individuals who benefited financially from this and call themselves the family legal representatives, they should have a game plan for the possibility of there being a hung jury, or and I doubt if it's going to be a not guilty jury, but at least a hung jury where he's not going to, be found guilty. I think there ought to be, some discussion about how are we going to respond, who we're going to hold responsible, and what is our community. Because there's going to have to come a point in time when we get tired of being sick and tired of not getting justice. And far too often in this criminal system of injustice, we don't get justice. But as long as we continue to do what we have been doing, I think we can expect the same incidents to occur. And I think there has to be a change, in terms of how we respond to what we're going through in this country. And I'm not only talking about the criminal system of injustice. We can talk about racism that exists in housing and employment and education. At some point in time, we're going to have to raise the bar. We're going to have to scratch our head and say, you know what? Marching is not getting it. And there's nothing wrong with marching, protesting. There's nothing wrong with protesting, but these are not bringing results. These are not bringing solutions. Compensation, family lawsuits is not getting it. It's all good, but these are not getting convictions, and these are not getting results, and these are not getting a change in how these officers and district attorneys and judges respond to our community. So at some point in time, we're going to have to be tired of being sick and tired, and we're going to have to, do something differently. Mm-hmm. That's the world according to Noel Leader. Okay. All right, fast forward. We have some swords we wanted to get to. We have a lot of time has passed. Michael, there was an 11-year-old boy. This happened. I know you wanted to talk about this story for a couple of weeks. There was an 11-year-old boy who went over a white friend's house, I think over a sleepover. And yeah. And why don't you tell our viewing audience about that? This happened in Plano, Texas.
Okay, a Black woman, Summer Smith, allowed her son, Samarian Smith, in Plano, Texas, to attend a sleepover. Now, this boy had been harassed for months in school. And one of the boys said, come on over, tricked him into coming over to a sleepover. He goes to the sleepover, and they started calling him all kind of N-words. And in that process, they kept shooting him every time he would fall asleep, shooting him with a BB gun while he was sleeping. And then they forced him to drink urine during the sleepover. So the next day when the mother found out about it, she was irate, and she reported it to the school authorities that they made him drink urine and all the other things they was doing, you know, just pushing him around and took advantage of him. And the school principal just basically said, that's just boys being boys. And they didn't refer any type of charges, any type of discipline to those children. Now, it's one thing joking and laughing, but once you start calling a little boy like that a nigger, all of you are calling him a nigger. And every time he tries to go to sleep, you shoot him with a BB gun and hit him and start laughing. And then you make him drink urine. It's no fun in that. That's criminal. Those acts are criminal. And if they can arrest little black boys and black girls 6 years old for nonsense, why don't they arrest preteens for what they were doing?
And Michael, you and I know, as well as our viewing audience, know that bullying is a good subject, a great subject in all of these schools. And, you know, teachers get trained in it, principals get trained in it, because a lot of bad things happen to students, you know, that get bullied. I'm not certain if there's some legal definition of bullying, but I'm surprised that, well, you know, when you look at the racial background of the aggressors and the victim in this particular case, I'm not really surprised. But the principal definitely should have taken this more seriously. Bullying should not be allowed. And as you stated, Michael, I think these young men cross a line into criminality, you know, by forcing them to drink something that could possibly potentially cause some damage, and then shooting them with a BB gun. I'm pretty sure there was an injury involved. So you have probably a minimum of assault 1 or assault 2. I mean, assault 2 or assault 3. So there definitely should have been criminal charges. But when you look at the racial makeup of this incident, then you can understand why there's this passive response, you know, by authorities. In this particular case, when you have a mother allowing her son to spend the night with some white boys, this reminds me of the case of Tamala Harris in 2018. It was a black woman who went over to a sleepover with some of her white friends.
Yeah.
Happened in Georgia. In the morning, she wound up dead in the backyard, and everybody had a hands-off response. Everybody claims, and she was only black woman in a house full of white women. She wound up dead. So this reminds me similar to that when you first talked to me about the story. Michael, let me ask you, as it relates to this particular case, did the family press any charges? Did they ultimately go to the police, or is this the last we heard?
Well, she tried, but I'm just questioning the mother's wisdom and even allowing him at a sleepover. If they've demonstrated for the past few months that they don't like him, why would she allow him to go to a sleepover? So I'm not going to totally throw shade at her, but I'm just saying her decision-making at best is questionable to even allow her son to go to a sleepover, because he crossed into enemy lines, and it could have been twice as worse. He is fortunate that he survived that. If one of them BB pellets had entered his eye, he would have lost his eye. So shooting a person with a BB gun, even if they got a quilt or something over them, is no fun. And, so I agree that he could have had injuries, and had it hit him in certain places, it could have been really severe.
Right, and I would state that sometimes physical scars and physical injuries are not as bad as emotional injuries. So we can only imagine, what he's experiencing at this particular school, what he experienced, during the sleepover, and how is he going to recover? How is that going to affect him psychologically, in his growth and development? So yeah, I agree with you, Mike. His mother's action definitely should be questioned, as it relates to allowing her son to be in that particular, scenario. All right, there's another old story that happened. George Bush, some of you may remember, he's the individual who went into a supermarket and killed 2 African-American senior citizens, 168 and 167, the elderly couple in Kentucky. Well, recently he pleaded guilty to crime indictments. Michael, why don't you update our community on this particular story?
Well, we followed it when this first happened a couple of years ago, Noel, and I remember how you commented on it, because when he went into the what he did first, if you remember, is that he went to a church. He tried to get into the church, but the church doors was locked while they were having service. The doors was locked, but the cameras caught it later that he was trying to enter the church.
Right.
And thank God that they locked the doors while they were having service. So he couldn't get into the church. So he drove 15 minutes away to the supermarket, saw 2 Black people in the supermarket and shot them. Now, when he came out of the supermarket, people outside in the parking lot had heard the shots fired. A white man drew his weapon out. And when they met face to face, the shooter said, "Don't shoot me, I'm white." And he said, "Don't shoot me, I'm white. White people don't shoot each other." And the white guy didn't shoot him. The white guy had his weapon out to go into the store and to challenge whoever probably shot the firearm. But when he told him, "Don't shoot me, I'm white. White people don't shoot each other," the white person didn't challenge him. He let him go, and the police caught him later. But the white guy who had his gun out seemed to identify, or the message seemed to resonate with the other person in the parking lot that had a gun. Your comments?
All right, that's that reminds me of the white police officer who told the white motorist when he ordered her, to step out of the vehicle, and she was afraid. And he told her, he said, "Listen, officers, we don't shoot white people, we shoot Black people."
That's
so
right.
I think this is a mentality that exists, and I think when you hear things like that, Michael, I mean, you just have to shake your head, man. I mean, what is it to say for a murderer, someone who murdered 2 senior citizens, to be approached by a white citizen who was ready to take action, but he says to him, "Don't shoot me, I'm white"? I mean, that mentality, that sick mentality. And for the white civilian who was going to take action, clearly, if it was African-American, there was a more likely of a chance of him using his or discharging his weapon. He would have been applauded.
Yeah.
And probably give some, they probably would have gave him a day in the city. But he was sympathetic to a white man who just shot his weapon, and he refused to use his weapon. But all right, so he pled guilty. He hasn't been sentenced yet, so we'll probably make an announcement. Hopefully, the amount of time that he gets is equal to the 2 lives that he took, and which basically means life in prison.
Right.
But let's go to another case of a hate crime. Lee Mount pleaded guilty to assaulting a Black teenager, and this is a Black teenager who was with his friends on the beach, playing music like young people do, and he was approached by a white man who assaulted him. Real quick on that story, Mike.
Well, he was telling white people, the guy Mo was telling white people, things like, "Look at them niggas don't belong here. They playing nigger music, monster music, they playing gang music," and was trying to whip up the crowd to support him. And so his actions were basically premeditated. So he told them to lower the music because he wanted them to say something. He said, I want them niggas to say something to me so I could beat their you-know-what. And so the teenagers didn't say anything to him. So after he told them that they didn't belong there, he walked to his car, got out a chain with a lock on the end of it, and went over there and bust one guy right in the mouth, knocking him out cold, breaking his jaw, and he lost a lot of teeth in that process. So my lesson would be to those young men, if he tells you emphatically to lower your music and you have no intentions on lowering your music, then consider your options. If you see him walk into his car, then, I was taught in martial arts, motion caused motion. You move, I move. I move, you move. So they should have done something other than just standing there looking at him. And he came back with the chain and used it. And it's just a tragedy. We talked about a few weeks ago how 3 black men were in a gas station and had words with a white guy. And when the white guy walked away, he went to his car, doubled around, and when they came out, he shot all 3 of them. He killed 2 of them. And these were teenagers. So the same thing happened with these teenagers. If a guy's basically threatening you, calling you niggas, and he go into his car, you need to respond or do something other than just stand there looking at it.
Right. Okay. All right. And the last story I want to talk about, there's been a lot of talk about what happened when the Capitol building was rushed during a rally hosted by Donald Trump. And one Capitol building officer was killed. Another one committed suicide weeks later. Well, unfortunately, there was another incident at the Capitol building where Noel Greys was shot and killed after he drove his vehicle onto Capitol grounds, killing one police officer and injuring another. Mike, do you want to talk about this particular case?
Yeah, let me just say briefly with respect to time that as the story goes, he drove into a checkpoint. Noel Greys drove into a checkpoint. There was a serious crash when it rammed into a police officer who was killed. The other one was seriously hurt. And subsequently, right after that, they claim he got out of the car pulling out a knife and they killed him. Now, I don't trust the Capitol Police because they killed a black woman who made a bad turn into a checkpoint, turned her car around, and they gave chase and actually chased her and killed her while her 1-year-old baby was in the back of the car. And her sister was an NYPD police officer. So, and they told a story about it, how it happened, because there was no need to shoot her. They gave chase for absolutely nothing. So in this particular case, they're trying to raise a question as to, was he a member of the Nation of Islam? Because they looked into his computer and they saw that on his social media page, they had a quote from Minister Farrakhan condemning the government. Now, all of the other people who have been killed, the police officer that was killed or other people that were killed or injured, they haven't looked into their religion. Nobody knows with those 2 police officers what their religion was. It's being charged with assault of police officer Sicknick. But they bringing up religion now. Isn't that odd? They looking into the social media page. Did they look at the social media page of Dylan Roof and see who he's associated with? So it only shows you when a black person is involved in something, the investigation is totally different.
Right. And then, of course, as you know, Michael, someone's religious faith should not even be brought up or discussed. We know why it is in this particular case. There's been many killers who might have been Christian, might have belonged to a church, might have been Catholic, might have been any religion. And if it's not a Muslim or if it's not African American, you don't hear religion is not discussed. It's not discussed whether or not this individual belonged to a church, and then they somehow connect the church or the church leader to the particular act. But unfortunately, we ran out of time. Michael, closing comments?
Yeah, just for the record, black man, black woman, protect the black child, accept your own, and be yourself.
All right, and of course, we give our condolences to the officer who lost his life, and we like to thank our engineers and producers, Veronica Kitt, Nat Wood, Sheila Berry. We'd like to thank you once again, our viewing audience, Lenny Lou, Kitty Cat, Little Mo, I love you all. We see you next Tuesday. Knowledge is power. See you next week. Peace.